Norway is most known for its nature, especially for the fjords. People come here for cozy road trips or to go on challenging adventures up in the mountains. And some also dream of living here, just like I did. Hello everyone and welcome to another video. I have received a lot of questions about how it is to live in Norway, and so many people told me that they really wish they could do this as well, but this is their biggest dream. And yes, I understand that because it used to be my biggest dream as well, and I'm very happy that I was able to actually make it come true. However, my motivation was very similar to what I heard from many of you, which is, well, I'm depressed here where I live in this city or wherever I live. And the only thing that could ever cure me is moving to Norway, to the beautiful fjord, and look outside the window and see these beautiful views. Now, yes, that was exactly how I felt. I always wanted to move to either Sweden or Norway because both are beautiful countries. But there is something about the dream versus the reality. So I would like to give a little bit of an insight into what it is actually like to live in the fjords of Norway. I've lived there for almost 2 years now, and it was not what I thought it would be before I moved here, and it was also not what I had felt the first couple months of living here. So my perspective changed a lot with a cat. My perspective changed a lot after living here for a while. So let's get into it. First of all, Norway is most known for its fjords. So the very dramatic landscape. Very steep walls of mountain, rivers ending up in those fjords and them merging together, snow on top of mountains, whereas down in the valley is already summer. It is very fascinating. However, there is a consequence to that kind of landscape, and that is that in some places the place you will live in is like this. So valleys are oftentimes kind of narrow. Like, for example, where I live, it is a very, very narrow valley. So do note that I lived in one of the very extreme places in Norway. But just to give you an idea, because many people say that they would love to live there as well, yeah, you might not. The thing about Gudvangen or valleys like that, I've seen a couple valleys like Gudvangen, they are very narrow like this, and that means that first of all you would have to have this one house in the whole valley that actually has a view out on the fjord. All the others don't have that. All the other houses just basically have a view out on the mountain on the other side of the valley, which is close enough so that you cannot see any sky. Like the house that I used to live in, it was very close to the other mountain, and all I could see is basically a wall of rock. That was my view. So it wasn't really an improvement to where I had lived before in Germany. It wasn't all that special. Of course, I had the fjord not too far away. The only places I could actually go on walks on was either this direction or that direction. So it wasn't really like, oh, today I'm gonna go there and then get lost in the forest, maybe walk up the mountain. You cannot walk up a mountain that is like this. Now, however, if you're thinking about moving to Norway, make sure that you actually check out where you're going to live. Is there a view, if you crave a view? Is there more than only one or two places to go on walks on? And is there a wide space somewhere nearby? Because if your surroundings are like this, your mind will go like that as well. There are places in Western Norway that are very different, that have a much more open view, that feel more open, and that don't feel like this clenched. These places like Gudvangen are great for vacation. They are great for a couple months. But after that, I wouldn't recommend staying there for too long. One of the reasons why is because in the winter you will not see the sun. Like, we don't have the Arctic nights where the sun doesn't rise at all. It does rise and it gets bright for a couple hours a day, but the sun does not rise above the mountains, because the mountains around Gudvangen and many other places in that area in Western Norway, they are over 1,000 meters high. That means that you're not going to see the sun for, I think, about 3 or more months, maybe 4. It can be quite difficult to handle, and even in the summers you do see the sun less than other places in Norway would. The next thing I would like to talk about is the actual dangers of living in a fjord. Now, this does not apply to all places. There are differences in the way the mountains function, if you want to say it like that. But where I live in the west of Norway, there is a lot of avalanches, and you need to be aware of that. Avalanches like landslides and snow falling off the mountains, or even entire slides of rocks, are quite common in western Norway, or any kind of landscape that looks like these kinds of mountains, I guess. So like anywhere where Norway has very high mountains and these fjord-like landscapes, there's a lot of avalanches. And those are, of course, very dangerous. Now, I don't want to frighten you. It is not generally dangerous to exist or live in Norway. It is a very safe country, but it is something to be aware of because the locals are always aware of it. And I was not at all aware of it when I moved here. Basically, what happens when you live in a valley like I used to is you have these big mountains like that, and they are almost like that upwards, like about 1,000 meters or more. And that means that whenever there's a lot of rain, or especially in spring when all the snow melts, there will be a lot of water carrying down soil. Also, after the ice melts, the ice expands between rocks during the winter. And then when it melts, those rocks might have come loose. So there will be a lot of rocks coming down from the mountains during the spring. It can also happen after longer periods of rain, but mostly happens during spring. That means that you have a lot of very large rocks coming down towards the valley oftentimes. This happens in many spots around the western fjords, and you can usually detect it by looking at where there's lots of rocks that are not covered by moss around in the area. Or like if you can look around in Norway, you can see these huge piles of rocks besides the road or somewhere close to the mountain oftentimes. Thanks for your input. Yes. Now, the problem with these avalanches is, of course, wherever there's already some houses standing, you can be pretty sure that there's not going to be any avalanches too close to it anytime soon, as these houses have most likely been standing for a while. But the problem that I had living here was that whenever there was a period of time where it's dangerous to be too close to the mountains because there was a lot of avalanche areas around where I lived, you can't really go on your usual walks because it's too dangerous to go on some of them. There's one path that I love to walk on that was not impossible but too dangerous to walk on during those periods of times because there's a high risk of rocks coming down, and trust me, there was a lot of rocks last year. It really did wake me up a little bit on how much I underestimated what it means to live that close to a mountain like that. There was one time that I unfortunately didn't manage to get any footage of, that I could actually feel the ground shaking, and I could hear this insanely loud crashing of stone, them rolling, bursting down. That avalanche that caused this noise and this shaking, it was, I don't want to lie accidentally, but I think it was approximately half a kilometer away from the house that I live in. It might have been a little closer, it might have been a little further away, but either way, it was so loud, it was so scary. And that really did make me want to say, okay, maybe I don't want to live in this valley. Now, once again, I don't know anybody who's ever gotten crushed by a stone. I don't know anybody who's ever gotten anything crushed by a stone or any houses, so you will be safe there. But please be aware, especially during those times, that this can happen, that you should not get too close to the mountains whenever it's been raining for too long, and do not try to climb mountains that look very steep because they might just throw rocks at you. There are a few signs that you can look out for to make sure that you will be safe when you walk around those mountains. Whenever you see those rock piles and there's no moss on them, these rocks have come down sometime in the last couple of years. There was no time for nature to reclaim them. There was no time to grow any moss or anything like that on them. The brighter they are, the more recent it has most likely been that they fell. So when they have turned a little darker, That usually means it might have been like a year or two since they've fallen. If they are very bright, it's most likely been very recent. You can even see it on the walls of the mountain. They can sometimes have like brighter, almost white spots in the rock. That means most likely there's been some rocks that broke off that wall recently. Anyway, so that means we can't go walking anywhere at any time, which did annoy me a lot. Now, this does not apply to the more wide fjords with less extremely steep mountains. They don't really have these problems as much, so I would always recommend move to one of those places instead of the very narrow, very steep places. Those will be tough to live in and sometimes even a bit scary. Now, one last thing that I want to mention about what was kind of a struggle about living in that valley is that the availability and the options that you have. Now, of course, if you want to move to the countryside, you are probably aiming to be less available, to have less things around you all the time. So driving a little while to the next shop is probably not a problem. If it is, then you shouldn't move to the super countryside. But if that is not a problem for you, there is one thing that still might or might not become a problem for you. It did, at least for me. So in Western Norway, because of these many very steep mountains and all of the fjords, there's very few options on where you can actually drive. Most of the time, there's a main road somewhere nearby, and that means that there might be a lot of noise, a lot of tourism happening. But apart from that, if you manage to live somewhere away from the main road, which is obviously possible, there's lots of places like that, but apart from that, it might be that depending on where you end up, there might just be only one road leading wherever you want to go. And whenever I want to drive to a friend of mine, it takes 2 hours because you have to drive all the way around. If you had a very fast boat, I guess you could just through the fjord and be there within maybe 1 hour. I don't know, I don't have a fast boat, but that is something to consider. One more thing I would like to mention is that if you actually consider moving here, I think you should be aware of the weather and the seasons in Norway. You probably already know that Norway is a country that has very high contrast in the seasons. So in the summers, it's very bright, the days are very long. The further you go up north, you even have a sun that never sets. The sun is just shining all day, every day, for months sometimes, like depending on where you are. And then in the winter, you will not even see the sun for months. Now, where I live, it is not as extreme, but you still feel quite the contrast between the seasons. So in the summer, it never gets dark. Very suddenly it changes, like the change between how bright or how dark it is very sudden. One day you thought, oh, the days are so short, it gets dark so soon. And then the other day, suddenly you're like, it doesn't get dark anymore. You have like proper summer feelings, even though it doesn't really get as warm during the day as it would in Spain, I guess. We do have proper summer days, so it can be very warm. Do note, however, if you want to live in the fjords of Norway, they draw in a lot of sea air, so it will oftentimes be windy and the weather can shift very suddenly. This is also something to consider if you just want to go on a vacation here. Please make sure that you have all kinds of clothing with you, because the summers here are not the same as the summers further down south in Europe. The summers here are very unpredictable, and it might just be that when you go hiking somewhere during July, one moment it's 20 degrees and then overnight it will suddenly turn 0 degrees or something like that. So do bring all kinds of clothing. As the summers are very bright, very beautiful, very glowy, we also have the very dark winters, and they do last for months, and they can be extremely cold depending on where you are in the country. Now in the fjords, I was kind of almost disappointed in the winter because the sea air draws in, and that means there's not as much cold, which can be good, I guess. But it's also, if you wanted winter wonderland, you're not going to get as much winter wonderland as the rest of Scandinavia does. It's gonna be warmer. So I didn't get as much snow as I had hoped, and there was also lots of rain, especially during December last year. There's no guarantee for snow. It can get down to minus 10, 20 degrees Celsius, but in the fjords it's like more of a will it, won't it, nobody knows. Anyway, if I could say anything else, it's that Be wary of the goats that might throw rocks at you while you go hiking. And apart from that, have a lovely day, have a lovely time wherever you live. And yeah, if you have any more questions about my life in Norway, what it's like, then feel free to ask down in the comments below. I will be making more videos about my life in Norway and my approach to slow living, creating a more magical and whimsical life. Also on some other topics, like I'm an absolute nerd on history and fantasy things, so these topics might mix in every once in a while. Have a lovely day and see you soon.